One important thing to point out before we get into the video itself. I like MJF. I like him as an in-ring performer. I like him as a talker. I do sincerely think that he's one of the best all-around wrestlers in North America and is fully deserving of the position he's in as of the writing of this video. I also have a generally positive opinion of any of the wrestlers I'll be mentioning here who are relevant to the arguments I'll be making, or just so happen to be around whenever MJF does something, unless I explicitly state otherwise. This to say that the reason I've been disappointed with MJF's AEW career so far have very little to do with his own body of work and more with how he's been portrayed by Tony Khan, especially in light of recent developments in his story. He is not without his faults, and those faults will be addressed in this video, but this is more of a dissection of AEW's booking than MJF himself, so keep that in mind. Maxwell Jacob Friedman debuts on the second episode of AEW Dynamite, in which he saves Cody from an assault by the Inner Circle. This face turn obviously doesn't last very long, and in due time the two will start feuding. I wasn't sure of whether or not discuss these first few months of his career, as there is really not much I can talk about that doesn't get repeated later on. But then I remembered that the repetitiveness of MJF's booking is one of the more common complaints people have when it gets brought up. I might as well address it while I'm here, even though it's hardly my main gripe by itself. Wrestling storylines aren't often the most original or well written, and even when someone comes up with a great idea, there is always the chance that something goes wrong, since there is a lot of moving parts in this medium and an injury is always right behind the corner. So if someone finds a formula that works and sticks to it, I can blame them, especially if it's one simple but effective, like having the babyface go through a series of trials and tribulations in order to have the right to face the big baddie. You get to see the person MJF is feuding with in usually fun exhibition matches and sometimes segments every week that would otherwise feel out of place. You get to see new or unusual faces, and sometimes they even add in interesting stipulations to spice things up. It's the perfect way to fill time before a pay-per-view. What's not to love? It works for what it is. But there is one huge fatal problem with this formula, and it's not in the repetitiveness, nor the people usually involved in these segments, but we'll get to that in due time. It's June 1st, 2022. MJF suffered a humiliating defeat at the hands of Wardlow just a few days earlier. People are eager to hear what he has to say, and the man does not disappoint. To give some context, it's been known for a while at this point that MJF, whether as a work or a shoot or a combination of both, was an act that, while he was in a great position booking-wise, his current contract did not reflect that. So, to build some tension and get people talking, they have him call out Tony Khan for giving better contracts to undeserving ex-WWE guys, in what is basically his own version of the pipe bomb promo. There is a few things that I was never a big fan of to begin with, like him using the dreaded mark word a bit too many times for my tastes, but other than that, it was a great performance. I'm just being a bit nitpicky here. But while for many this is the moment that put MJF on the map and cemented him as a potential main eventer, all I was left with in the end was the fear that this was going exactly where I thought it would go, and I would be proven right not too long after. Fast forward to All Out 2022, the Casino Ladder match. Who of the 7 people in the ring will challenge CM Punk next for the AEW Championship? Wheeler Yuta? Dante Martin? The crowd is on their feet. This is the part where I explicitly state that Dante Martin and Wheeler Yuta are bad, by the way, just so we are clear. But wait, an 8th contender makes his entrance in the middle of the match. It's MJF and his brought company. His new allies, the Firm, quickly dispose of everyone in MJF's way and help him win this contest. None of the people who got pretty much screwed over by the booker will ever address this on live TV, and the creation of the firm is, in retrospective, one of the stupidest things I've ever seen this company do, but I digress. Let's get to the main point here. Tony Khan respected MJF's demands. He reworked his contract and gave him a guaranteed title shot against Punk that he can invoke whenever he pleases. Why? Well, in kayfabe, the answer would be that MJF is such a hot commodity that Tony Khan can't afford to lose him, especially to WWE. Is it true though? And does it matter if it is not? What MJF specifically says in the Pipe Bomb promo is that he is the biggest minute-by-minute draw in the company. Of course, in any other instance, this would be just a case of a heel hyping himself up, lying through his teeth, nothing out of the ordinary. But knowing how Tony agreed to all of MJF's terms, to the point of granting him expensive licensed music for his big return, are we supposed to believe that he was telling the truth in kayfabe? It sure as fuck isn't the case in real life, let me tell you that. The episode of his big return, after 2 months that he's been away, right after the pay-per-view, couldn't even crack 1 million views. Hell, not even the specific segment he was in did reach that number, if you look at the graphics. Of course, I could say that him becoming world champion improved Dynamite's overall ratings to help his case. That is also false. Did he have a particular impact on pay-per-view numbers? Not that I know of. Does he sell a lot of merch? Not really. Ticket sales? No, there is really no evidence of that either. So what gives? Are we supposed to play along to the idea that he's a draw until he actually becomes one? I would normally not give 2 shits about this ratings talk, mind you. None of these things influence my opinion on MJF, and I didn't mean to bring them up to bury him or something. But you shouldn't bring up real life elements to a wrestling storyline if they are so easily proven to be false. And this flaw doesn't only apply to one specific storyline centered around MJF, it arguably applies to his entire character. Maxwell must be a big fan of Kaufman, seeing how committed he is to staying in character at all times, something that I greatly appreciate. He's always a prick, 24/7. He's fully dedicated to the art of fucking with people, unafraid to look like a fool if he has to. Sometimes he does a bit of virtual signaling on Twitter, but unlike some other people, I don't consider that as him being out of character. He has talked about being Jewish in storyline and was bullied in storyline and likely in real life because of it, so it makes sense. The problem is, his character isn't that he's just supposed to be a prick. He is supposed to be a rich prick. And you can't just LARP as a rich kid with a silver spoon in your mouth when people have seen you working bingo halls for years before making it to AEW. Your parents don't drive a BMW if you're portraying a character that has fuck you money and didn't have to work for it before hitting the big times. All I'm saying is, this isn't the 80s. You can't just one day come up with a gimmick for your local territory and stay in character for those handful of interviews that you're required to do. People can and will look up things about your personal and professional life if they're out there. Especially if, by out there, we are talking about your very own Twitter feed. There is no point in being so committed to an act that is so easily exposed, is what I'm saying. It only makes your act look faker. You might be thinking I'm scrutinizing MJF's character a bit too much by now, to which I can only say, fair enough, but the blame doesn't entirely lie on his shoulders. This hasn't always been the case, but the current AEW product is... and I don't know how to put this without getting instantly laughed at. But it is very grounded in reality. Don't laugh, I'm serious. Just listen to what I have to say. They got rid of all the supernatural stuff, the cinematic matches are gone, they've toned down a lot of the comedy, all the backstage segments are in interview format. So it's not like you see 2 people having a conversation pretending that there isn't a camera right in front of them, for example. And the video packages don't have a lot of out there stuff, excluding maybe the House of Black. This isn't at all a bad thing, actually. It helps AEW stand out from WWE, it makes it unique, but it also makes it a lot harder to separate in the mind of the viewer what happens inside the ring and what happens outside. There is less suspension of disbelief when something doesn't quite make sense. For most wrestlers in AEW this isn't even a problem actually, because their online presence, their real life personality when they're not on TBS or TNT isn't an extension of the character they play on TV. Only MJF does that to this level of commitment. I'll go back to the casino ladder match for a second to better express the point I'm making, because there is an angle that is nearly identical to the one I just described, with the only important difference that it actually works: the 2019 Money in the Bank ladder match. People absolutely fucking hated this at the time, but it's one of the best examples of legit heel heat that you can find in modern wrestling, and as such I think it deserves proper praise. As I said, what happens in the moment itself is very similar to what happened at All Out 2022. A bunch of people are competing over the chance of getting a world title match, anytime, any place. Then the big baddie comes in, kills everyone and wins. So what's the difference? The believability. Brock Lesnar is the highest paid wrestler in the history of the whole company. Combine that with the fact that he's also its biggest ratings draw, at least it was in 2019, and there is a manager known for finding ways to make him work as little as possible, and he has a boss that is the quintessential heel authority figure, and the logic behind his whole ordeal is pretty much skin tight. Brock could have easily won that match in a fair contest in kayfabe, but chose not to, simply because he had the leverage to decide otherwise. It doesn't get more heelish than that, and that's what makes it so good. The same scenario doesn't work nearly as well in AEW, where the boss is supposed to be a neutral figure at worst, and MJF doesn't have the real life background to afford to swing his dick around like that. Nor he has any believable tool that he can use against Tony to make him do what he wants. See where I'm getting at? Once you start paying attention to the details regarding who MJF is and how he's portrayed, the big picture doesn't look as pretty anymore. And AEW expects you to actively look at these details to follow some of the storylines, or at least it sparks the curiosity to look these things up, only to make you find out that they don't match the narrative presented. Meanwhile, even if I ignore the real life elements in that specific WWE angle, the whole thing doesn't make any more or less sense. It's pretty much covered on both sides, fake and real. So, even if I can go out of my way to ignore MJF's past and supplementary work, and assume his character could easily find the money to, I don't know, hire Wardlow or all the other people he paid to do his bidding, then another question arises. Where did the leverage he had on his opponents come from? I talked about a fatal flaw when covering the MJF formula at the beginning of this video. Well, there you have it. The flaw is that until very recently, his opponents had really no reason at all to play along with what MJF asked them to do. Watching AEW, I was always under the impression that the reason why MJF got away with such contrived stipulation was because he paid off Tony Khan. It was never implied anywhere, not even in the pipe bomb promo where he called him out, but you know, it makes sense, right? He's rich, he's a chicken shit, it adds up. But now that we have been made aware in kayfabe that the company itself didn't value him a whole lot until very recently, why should I buy the idea that Tony wouldn't just book a one-on-one match on TV whenever MJF starts shit with someone, instead of dragging the rivalry for months? He booked a world title unification match in the middle of an episode of Dynamite. He put Danielson vs Omega in a TV opener 2 weeks after Danielson debuted. What makes someone like MJF above something like this? Even if we play along with the idea that he is a draw. I don't know. Some food for thought. So, at the end of the day, is everything I just described in this video such a big deal? Maybe not. MJF is clearly good enough to carry himself just fine. I doubt when people will be talking about him a decade down the line, they'll mention how he overuses cheap heat, he talks about the local sports team and there's a repetitive routine. But that doesn't mean that AEW itself should get away with squandering his potential. And yeah, that's the video. Hope you enjoyed it. I decided to write this down the day after reading the promo where MJF talked about framing some chick when he was in college or something. I thought I'd include it in the video somewhere because I thought it was so unbelievably stupid, but somehow I forgot. I may write up a review for AEW Fight Forever if that ever comes out. Maybe I'll do a comparison with WWE 2K46, so stay tuned for that. Next devlog, never.